Thank you, Governance Advisor. So welcome to the meeting of the Performance Audit and Risk Committee, 28th July 2020. Welcome to the members of the committee and also to any to council officers and to any members of the public who are watching this live stream. Just to advise that this is the first meeting of the committee since the 18th of March 2020 due to the COVID lockdown. So some matters are a little bit older than would be the case, but they're still relevant. So I'll start the meeting with requests for apologies. I think the only one missing, or two missing, are me, Gary Kircher, and Councillor Jeremy Holding. So
I'll move as received and second.
Moved Councillor Hopkins, seconded Councillor Keenan. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Clear those apologies to be accepted and carried. Declarations of interest in the proceedings today. Anybody wishing to declare? All right, nothing to declare. So we'll go on to the confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting on the 18th of March, which are start on page 7 of the papers.
I'm happy to move the confirmation of those minutes, Councillor.
And I'll second.
Yes, thank you. So moved Councillor Hopkins, seconded Councillor McRory. All in favour of that, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? So get those minutes to be carried. Minutes go through to page 11. So page 12 of the decision reports, and the first one of those is the Treasury Strategy 2020-21 financial year, written by Mr. Wells under Mr. Hope's oversight authority. So Mr. Wells and Mr. Hope, they want to add any comments to the report in the papers?
We are required to have a Treasury strategy in place for all parts of the financial year. This is very much a holding pattern strategy as we move through the local government funding agency process. We hope to have finished by the end of the first quarter. And as part of the LGFA process, a new Treasury strategy will be quite different, will be adopted prior to the start of that quarter. So this is very much a holding pattern. Mr. Wells probably doesn't have too much to add. He'll have lots to say about the next report. So I'm just happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hope. Any questions on the report? Councillor Hopkins.
Well, yeah, look, this, what I need to ask is, when are we going to turn a general phrase like invest any available funds to the best advantage into an actual strategy? Because even if we're just adopting this report for 3 months, given the COVID impacts in the next report and all these other things, it seems to me we've got to look at the investment side of our Treasury strategy in much greater detail. So when are we going to, we keep talking about it, but nothing happens by way of a tangible policy. So when will it, please?
Well, I can respond, Councillor Hopkins. I think I'll remind you we actually have no funds to invest at the present time, so there's no urgency in the matter at all.
Well, respectfully, I beg to differ. I mean, we have access to, amongst other things, a loan fund, a source of monies, and we have monies loaned at the moment, and we are saying that we're spending an awful lot of money on borrowing. There are investment opportunities available. I've just clipped a few from the paper in the last few days. You've got 7% here, 8.3% elsewhere. There are things that we could be looking at investing in to offset the impact of the low rates we're earning from banks and elsewhere. And I just think our Treasury strategy needs to be more encompassing. I really genuinely do. Seriously, I'm quite serious about this. For me, I would want Paul and Fergus to be working on this as a priority.
I think you'll find that those higher interest rates attract with them higher risk, and council is a risk-averse organisation. It's playing with public money rather than its own, and your choices with your money will be different to how the ratepayers would want council to deal with their money.
We are risk averse, but we're not. We wouldn't have invested in Noik in Curragh down through an irrigation company or the retirement village.
Excuse me, Jim. We've had this discussion before, and there's no support. You're a sole voice in the wilderness. Right. There's no support for your point of view, and I think those investments don't have the rating that council requires for its investments. They're not legally saleable should council require the money for another purpose. So I think you're pushing an old chestnut that has no support.
Well, I'll finish by saying I believe we should be looking at property and investments as a continuum and rethinking how we manage them and allocating some portion of our funds, should we choose, to investments that might give us a return.
Mr. Chair, it is important to note that actually that's what we are investing in. We're Retirement Village, 11.5 million. We're investing in property there. We're not making a high return. We're making definitely more than we get in the bank, and it's delivering real returns to the community in other ways. We are investing in irrigation, as Councillor Hopkins pointed out, and that's another 18 million, I think it is. That is encouraging growth in our community. We are making more money than we would in the bank. No, we're not getting 8%, but I think, as you pointed out, that is higher risk. It is opt-in money that would be difficult to get out. It doesn't have the backing and security that we've got with the other investments we have. I think you're quite right. We actually are doing quite a good job, and that has been the direction we've given staff up to now.
Yeah, thank you, good. I concur with your comments that the money that's been invested in property is money invested in the North Otago Waitaki community. So it's bringing a bigger return. A lot of these investments will be in places like Auckland, commercial developments, which I don't think our ratepayers would thank us for putting money in there if that money was ever to be put at risk. So moving on. So the paper, so page 12, Treasury Strategy. So page 12, page 13, the background. So there's the lending there, which is all the reasons where the surplus funds have disappeared to, have been utilised this in the last 2019-20 year. Curragh Duntree Irrigation Company, Waitaki District Health Services Limited, and other works, capital works completed by council. And loans external pay. So, do any members of the committee have any questions on the matters advised in the report between pages 18 and 31? Sorry, between page 12 to 17.
Well, just Mr. Chair, I had a question on 14 and 15, but just borrowing on page 14. As at 30 June, we'd borrowed 7.4 of the 15 million available. If you've told us, and I've forgotten, I apologize. 7,400,000 that we've borrowed. Are we talking? Can you give us a bit more information about that, please?
Well, our borrowings through the Carl facility effectively are an overdraft,
Yes.
but at a much better rate. We are, instead of placing money on term deposit, we are reducing that loan whenever we have surplus funds. We've currently extended that borrowing on the 20th of July to 10.2 million. But have every prospect of being able to repay a portion of that in the next week. It's a moving target, and we endeavour to restrain it as much as possible because we want to reduce the interest cost to council. It's a good rate, but it's not the best rate. The best rate will be one that we can secure through the LGFA, I suspect.
Well, so that's obviously the BNZ, what's called a CARL loan at present time is the funding at present time. But the interest rates are in excess of what will be charged by the local government funding authority. That is, facility is in place. So when the LGFA funds are available, I'm sure you'll borrow and repay the BNZ.
Presumably, yes.
Yes.
Not presumably.
Indeed. So, but the BNZ funding will remain there as a backstop.
I think it would be sensible to retain, if not the whole lot, then at least a sizable chunk of it as a fallback.
Yes.
Or as a day-to-day source of funding. I'm not sure as to the length or term of the LGFA funding.
You mentioned, Councillor Hopkins, another question on page
No,
15.
I think, I suspect that Mr. Wells' answer has answered that question. I suppose, and this, I suspect this is probably because my, I'm thinking of this as a bank account. If you look on page 15, we're showing in August of this year that we're making about north of 8 million plus. And then over the next couple of months, we're proposing to go roughly into overdraft 2.5 million for each month, which still puts us 3 mil ahead.
That's right.
It's a private bank account. So I was just going to, the question really is if we're built up such a head of steam in August, why are we going to overdraft in September and October?
So it's really looking at the movements in the bank account rather than actually putting money in and taking money out. It's really the movements. The August additional cash is derived from the assumption that when the new loan documentation from the week is signed, we will receive an initial payment of $2 million, and that will be used immediately to reduce borrowings in the CARL facility. And August also is the first of our quarterly rate payment months, so we would expect a handy amount of cash to arrive that month as well. So all things being equal, if those things happen as we expect, then we should be in a position to repay maybe 4 million from the CARL facility. But then September and October, we will go back to the CARL facility to draw further funds down. It's an in and out. It's just the same as your own overdraft position, really. If you need it, then you use it. When you don't, you repay it. But the whole thing will be different under the LGFA structure, I would expect.
I assume, Mr. Wells, that your graph on page 15 showing in August 20, perhaps about 10.5 million of funds available. That includes a rates payment on the 25th of August.
Yes, it does.
As well as a capital repayment from a council investment.
Yep.
Why that's higher than the next three rate payments.
Very much.
Ian, thank you very much.
Councillor McRogan?
2 questions, Chair. First one, short employee entitlement liabilities. I see that as holiday pay, pretty much. Has risen quite substantially, and you're saying it's due to COVID, but is there a plan to reduce that?
That's a matter that's regularly monitored by the executive team. We look at people's entitlement versus their leave outstanding. Particularly people that have over 1.5 times their annual allowance. And those matters are discussed with people, life balances, to make sure there is actually a plan, that they have plans to take leave. And in the worst case, people can be instructed to take leave. That's used very infrequently, but it is something that is available if the balance grows too much.
So you would suggest then, I would suggest what you're just saying, that would stay at about that level now, given the COVID's over and leave might be being taken, given the pressures of the environment and all that?
No, you would expect to see it come down.
Yeah, okay.
It was an unusual time, and a lot of people actually had holidays planned in the June, July, August period.
Sure.
And they just haven't been able to.
Yeah, I understand that. Okay, second question, under capital expenditure, Alps to Ocean. I just wondered why the,
Councillor Roby.
If we jump
Just
way
we're
ahead,
on Treasury Strategy, number 4 at 9. That's there for the next
Sorry.
report.
sorry, okay, my apologies.
We'll come to that very soon.
Sorry,
Yeah, I'll pass you a question again then. So,
sorry, jumped the gun.
yeah. So just on the Treasury Strategy is pages 12 to 17. Are there any further questions on that? On the report as written, any comments? Which I think in summary, Mr. Wells, the fact is that the council is going to be more of a borrower than a lender in the next period of time.
for the foreseeable future, I'm sorry to say, but at least it's a good time to be a borrower.
Yes.
There's virtually nothing available for investments in the bank, which is our other option currently.
And then the rates to receive on investments are very low, whereas the rate to borrowing is low as well. So it's a good time to be a borrower. All right, well, comments, the recommendation on page 12. Move Councillor Kingham, seconded Councillor Halalane. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Yeah, that carried. Right, on to page 18, which is the quarterly financial report. So, page 18. Quarterly financial report, once again, Mr. Wells and Mr. Hope. Again, just ask Ian or Paul if you want to add anything extra to the report.
Mr. Wells can speak to this one.
Thank you very much. So this is basically a projection of where we'll be at 30th of June. A lot of numbers are still yet to be tied down, but we've given it our best guess. So the projected year-end thousands of dollars column is where we see ourselves being after we have finalised all of the accruals, done the depreciation, worked through all the proceeds of sales of assets and looked at vested assets and taken various other gains and losses into account. Tried to be conservative, but I've often been caught out on these projections in the past. I say that it's infallible, but generally speaking, the first pages 18 to 22 or 23 highlight the major considerations that have led to the variance, either plus or minus. There are further information given in the actual financial statements that appear a wee bit further through the report, but hopefully this gives you, hopefully this answers the questions that I'm sure you're all ready to ask, but I'm happy to take questions or maybe able to support me in coming up with the right answers.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. And I note in your commentary that you do say these projections are indicative only and are subject to change arising from recognition of actual figures and also possibly from the audit process. So yes, they are projected, they are not definite end of year figures, so put that caution in mind. So I see that the total projected revenue is 51.296 million, under budget by 1.5 million. The details are then given of where the amounts have differed from the budget. And the expenditure is projected at 53.959 million, over budget by 2.775 million. Again, there's an explanation of where that extra expenditure has been incurred. I note that of that, 900,000 is depreciation.
Yeah, which we have signalled all year is as a result of the increased revaluation. And I just suggest that if you skip through to page 24, you'll see that we're projecting a deficit before tax of 2.6 million against a surplus in the budget of 1.6 roughly. So we're 4.3 million behind budget.
Yes.
Because of not only COVID-19, but it has certainly not helped us. And when you consider that we've received double the income from dividends that we had anticipated, budget, it could have been worse.
Yes, it could have been a lot worse. So we go back to the, just work our way through.
Yep.
Page 18, the revenue there, the series of the revenue.
Yes,
Yeah, Councillor Hopkins.
You thank you for this. It's just at the bottom under government grants, I'm presuming that the loss of revenue from the roading program is a matter of timing only.
That's correct. I believe that for all the indications I have is that we have a 3-year road program from CTA. What we don't do in year 1, we pick up in year 2 and attempt to do that. If we haven't done the roading program at the end of the 3 years, then it's subject to negotiation. But at the moment, what we haven't done will be pushed back and done.
Can you explain the next one? Application for BGF funding for airport developments not successful / not required equals reduced revenue of 700K.
So when we were setting the budget, there was projected to be a project to build a hangar at the airport for the New Zealand Aircraft Academy. Yep, and that was going to cost 1.4 million, and we had applied, or we're going to apply to the Provincial Growth Fund for 50% of that. In the finish, those plans changed. The hangar that was constructed, and it has, I think it's been finished now, cost a good deal less, and the arrangements with NZAA have changed. But as a result of that, the 700,000 of budgeted income was not applied for, or was applied for, but we were unsuccessful. Anyway, it is lost revenue effectively because it was budgeted but not received.
But it's lost revenue against an unexpended cost.
Against capital.
Saving.
It was a capital project. So yeah.
Saving.
Yeah.
We haven't spent the money on capital works, but we
No.
never received the money to offset that.
Going down to dividend and subvention payments, 1.084 million received, as opposed to 500,000. So our sincere thanks to Whitestone Contracting Limited dividends and subvention, and also Civic Financial Services, a company that the council had investments in. So that was a windfall. It wasn't budgeted for in the current year. So down to expenditure. Depreciation, finance charges, other expenses.
Yeah, again, just I suppose that the finance charge is the Carl thing that you were talking about before.
Yes, so the Carl facility obviously charges us interest when we use it, and also charges us a non-utilisation fee when we don't. So in theory, because I can draw funds out of that at a 5 minutes notice, they keep $15 million tagged for Waitaki District Council, and we pay a very small fee for that privilege. Yes, and we, as you'll know, it's with the annual plan, we had no intention of borrowing. The $10,000 in the budget was purely for if we had to dip into the overdraft. But our plans changed fairly quickly in the year it's just been. And I think we've been borrowing on the Carl facility since about October.
Because the next category, other expenses as well, show the over expenditure that wasn't budgeted for.
Yep.
So that's part of the money that we've been borrowed from the BNZ to pay the business as usual expenses plus those unusual items.
Yeah, so we've also got the results of the rating sales. There's always write-offs when we get into that territory. And I've also allowed $400,000 in that figure for late accruals, late invoices that we didn't have to hand at the time. They are slowly filtering in. I doubt we'll get to the 400,000, but it seemed appropriate to put an extra in there just in case.
Yep.
So what I'm saying is, it's possible for the result to be better, but not much better.
Through you, Mr. Chair, looking at those expenses, couldn't work this out because we're showing that we've exceeded the budget by 1,349,000. More if you tally up those first four you do, that's what it more or less comes to. But then we're showing that we saved 174,000 in reduced travel and training and 400,000 in reduced maintenance. So shouldn't that have a show up on the 1,349,000?
Well, the 1.3 million is really the total of all the pluses and minuses in that area.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I just ask a question then in relation to that? We spend 223,000 of unbudgeted use of external resources in building and planning. I mean, how does that not come through to us? That's a hell of a lot of money just to spend without a budget.
So these are the use of external specialists in the building consent and resource consent areas, which have been reported to the regulatory committee, perhaps. It's been an ongoing issue throughout the year. And I'm pretty sure it's been highlighted to some committees.
Well, in that case, the budget of that, I suppose the question then is, if it has been reported, then presumably the budget should have been amended, then presumably it shouldn't be listed as an unbudgeted use.
At this point, though, we're measuring ourselves against the annual plan itself and not against living budgets, which are the ones that we produced during the year.
Thank you.
It's unfortunate because you are right that there were budget allowances made during the year, but at this point, we are required by law to report against the original annual plan.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. We're down to the next page, the statement of financial position, showing property, plant and equipment has increased due to the revaluation of property, 38.7 million. And tangible assets, including internally generated software. So that is software that has been prepared by the in-house information services team, which has been capitalised rather than being treated as an expense. Is that one as well?
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
Oh, sorry.
It's terrible, isn't it?
Intangible assets here.
Yes.
The purchased and internally generated software. So that's software written by Mr. Chow and his team, I assume, which has been capitalised as an asset.
Yes, so you've got a number of staff who have been taken on for particular capital works involved in the development of software and other computer applications, and they have been incorporated into that number. It's an estimated split because at this point all of our capital expenditure goes to a range of capital codes, and then when the final capitalisation is undertaken, it's when it's split out into tangible and intangible assets. So it's a wee bit of an estimate at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wells. Right, any other questions down on that page? On the way down there, or
Which page, Mr. Chair, you're referring to?
page 20?
Thought I better check.
Yes.
One question, I mean, you're talking about the depressing effect on log prices arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. Is that offset in any way? I mean, are we able to make money out of the forest through the carbon offsets and things of that sort that might compensate in some way for that?
I would seriously doubt it.
Okay, no, that's fine.
We don't have enough carbon credits to do anything.
No, that's fine. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
So on to page, oh, sorry, just personal.
No, but what I'm saying is that every year we revalue our forests, and we normally anticipate a growth in the value of about $50,000 or $60,000 because of the effect of COVID-19, which destroyed the logging market, the export market. Our valuation went up, but only sufficient to reflect the increased size of the trees. It didn't really take into account, it took into account, sorry, the fact that at this point, the price of those logs, were we to chop them down, is less than it would be in a normal year. So we didn't revalue the forest by as much as we expected to because of COVID-19.
25 years is a long time.
It'll come right. I'm sure it will come right.
Yeah, revaluation each year of a growing crop to come to its final value. So we go on to the trees. Yeah, we go to page 21 and Mr. Councillor Roby.
Yeah, this time.
Your time
Sorry
is
about that
now.
before. Look, it's just a question. Why is the Alps to Ocean repairs related to flood damage under the heading of capital expenditure? Is it KEX or is it, how is it, is that normally treated as capital expenditure? Could somebody let me know?
I'm not sure where you are.
Page 21 under the heading capital expenditure, 3 from the top. Elements of the work were treated as capital because we were effectively renewing damaged culverts rather than treating them as maintenance. Okay.
Yeah, I think the flood had washed some out.
Okay, all right. I thought it might have been a repair.
Would that also be, Mr. Wells, where perhaps track had been washed out and replaced perhaps with a concrete track rather than?
I think there would be elements of that involved. Yes, and I believe the reference to flood damage in 2018, I believe we had either 18 months or 2 years to make good on that and still receive the fund. Hence, there was a bit of a rush at the end to get everything.
Thank you.
And Councillor Roby's question before regarding employment entitlement liabilities increased from 1.2 million to 1.632 million.
Yep.
As a result of staff leave not being able to be taken during lockdown, and opportunities for leave are now more limited.
Well, certainly, I'm not planning any overseas holidays in the near future. I don't know about you.
Plenty of places around New Zealand to go on holiday with that as well.
True enough, yeah.
But I think I'm sure that Chief Executive Mr. Powell will have that figure under his scrutiny and we'll ensure the staff take leave as leave is designed for, so they are fresh and don't become immediately tired in their job. So that's page 21. Any further questions there on the capital expenditure? Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, look, whether it's this page or the next page, but I mean, we've got on this page, we're basically nearly 10 million short of our capital expenditure budgets, right? So we're virtually 10 million under budget. Our revenue is basically if you go to page 23, our revenue is basically only 1.5 million less than we budgeted. And I'm trying to work out in the end how we turn the surplus we had into the deficit we've got with the numbers that, you know, how do we be nearly 10 million under our capex and so on?
Well, capex has nothing to do with operations. The operational spend and operational revenue are different from capital spend.
So if I look at, so what I basically do is I look at 23 and I see that our revenue is 1.5 less than we expected. And I look at 24 and expenditure based on actuals is about 1 million more. And is that it? Is that?
Yeah.
Is that the difference? Is that the 3 million? But it isn't quite, is it?
No, it's on page 24, the difference between expense budgeted and actual expense is 2.775 million. And if you take the under revenue of 1.5 million, you get 4.335, which is the increase in the deficit, or that change from surplus to deficit. But none of those numbers are related to capital spend. If we had spent 10 million more on capital, we would owe the bank another 10 million. And we would probably be spending more on depreciation or recognising more of a depreciation expense. But I mean, at this point, it's going to be up to managers now to recommend to this committee, probably at the next meeting, what budgets they want to carry forward with regard to capital spend. And that will be for you then to say, yes, you can, or no, you can't. Sometimes we are a bit optimistic in what we plan for our capital spend. We have too many projects, perhaps. And maybe that's something to look at when we're doing the OTP.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wells. Yeah, the pages 23 and 24, that's the actual income and the operating expenditure. So the capital expenditure only shows on page 24 under depreciation and amortization. Is where the capital
The actual
expenditure,
cost.
This is really helpful for the accountant.
well, yes, yes. So that
No, but I mean, I hope you sort of understand from a lay point of view. I look at the whole CapEx thing, we're just so much under budget. And then, but anyway, no, thank you.
But if you look at page 25 under non-current assets, property, plant and equipment, PPE.
Yeah.
2019, 793 million. Budget is 798. In fact, it's 836 million, which is the revaluation of the property last year plus the capital expenditure that's been spent during the current year. Yeah, Kircher.
Yeah, some councils have a KPI for their CE around the percentage of capital expenditure that's actually achieved during the year, that's a good measure to make sure that we're not actually trying to bite off more than we can chew and say we're going to do all these things and not do them. So it works both ways. It helps to drive that work to be done, but also make sure that there's we make good decisions as to what's going to be in our annual plan for capital work the year ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kircher. And Mr. Power, in fact, has pointed out in his reports that perhaps council should perhaps plan to do less than what they've done in the past and get done what they planned rather than putting too many items in the capital planning program. So,
although in fairness, a lot of these do look as though they were derailed by COVID.
but yes, this year is exceptional year in that respect. All right, so just going through the statement of comprehensive revenue and expenses on page 23 is revenue. And as Mr. Wells has advised, it's down by 1.560 million. With the explanation shown in the coloured panel on the right-hand side. Page 24 is expenses, which have increased by nearly 1 million.
Nearly 3 million, sorry.
As well.
It's increased by nearly 3 million.
Oh, sorry, yes, really, that's, yes, sorry, indeed, yes, by, yep. So by 3 million, indeed. So the net difference is 4.335 million from budget to the, as Mr. Wells has pointed out, projected deficit before tax. Then adding in the revaluation of the properties, a revaluation gain of 38.711 million. So it gives on paper, a profit for the year of 36.048 million, which of course is all on paper because it's only a revaluation of the property portfolio held by council. And so on to the next page, statement of financial position, or balance sheet in the old terms.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, forgive me. I'm now slightly bewildered in the sense that if it looks as though, if you look at, assuming a layperson is looking at these figures, projected expenses for 2020 are showing at the top as 25,706, which in theory is less than the figure on the right, is it not? And if you work down from that, you then get a surplus or deficit before tax of 2663. So,
yeah.
So
compared to budget surplus of 1672, which is 4.335 difference.
right, got the bingo snap, yes. So, yep, so 1 point, yep, all right. No, thank you. I was looking, yeah, I was fearful that I was reading them the wrong way around.
Right, indeed.
So we have been paying 204,000 more in wages and salaries than we had budgeted.
Yes, yes. But that's compensated for by additional recoveries of some of those salaries. 203,000 is a gain, which means that we are only 8,000 adrift of budget at year end.
Including TVSA contributions.
Yeah.
Right, Councillor Monroe?
Yeah, page 25. What is assets held for sale? I see they were there in 2019, 1.15. Could somebody explain that, please? I may have missed this in our last meeting, but sorry.
Assets held for sale, the 1.15 million relates to 3 sections that are currently occupied by Tipari and North End Business Park. Council bought those from the developer and then sold them to Tipari on a settlement basis. Tipari have until 2023 or 2024 to make good on that sale. And at this point, we don't expect to pay early because the interest that we're charging on the way of rent is extremely peppercorn.
Okay, no, good to know. Thank you.
And the other assets held for sale, 290,000, that appears as a current asset, that relates to properties that are currently actively being marketed. And we expect to sell within 12 months. The accounting standards require that we transfer such assets from the asset register and hold them on the balance sheet separately until they're dealt with.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
All right, we need to move along, members of the committee. So this report goes through to page 31. Other pertinent questions you want to ask on the way through? Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, look, sorry, just a couple on 29. So these are the internal loan balances. Can you refresh my memory? Wasn't we borrowed 42,000 for waste minimisation and management, and Elmwood Harbour and Historic Precinct borrowing? Give us, or plus O'Hare drinking water standards upgrade, that 37, it's a small amount, but is that just a consultation?
Dealing with the first of your questions, the waste management and minimisation, if I'm correct, is related to work done to prepare the way for the relocation of the Hamden closed landfill, which has to be uplifted basically and transferred to Palmerston because it's being encroached by the sea. Now, what were the other items?
Well, I'm assuming that the Harbour and Historic Precinct borrowing is for Holmes Wharf and things.
Yes, it is. Yep.
That's fine.
Yep.
And just finally, just as much as anything for the public record, that 37,000 loan funding for the O'Hare drinking water standards upgrade down the bottom projects. That's solely for the, is that solely for the consultation, or does, how much of that involves engineering planning?
It's probably an element of both, but they've not dug any holes in the ground that I'm aware of.
No. So we've spent 37,000 today and nothing's happened.
It's easy to spend money.
I know. I'm not criticising us in this instance.
Yep.
I'm looking at Marty to wonder if.
Yeah, through the chair, we've spent about 200,000. This is just the bit that's been.
So the figures here are at
Just the last 12 months. All right, so the recommendation on page 18, that the performance audit of the risk committee receives and votes information. Someone prepared to move that stage? Secretary, thank you.
Second.
Seconded, Councillor Groby.
Thank you.
All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Declare that carried. Right on to page 32.
Thank you for the questions, Mr. Chair.
There's quite a bit of information there. We could probably could have spent longer, but we don't have time. I'm sorry. So.
I'm happy with the amount of time we've spent, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your information. Okay, page 32, we're on to the Finance and Corporate Development Group update. Once again, Mr. Hope is the author. So this update, of course, is the activity of the Finance and Corporate Development Group over the last quarter, from April to June 2020. So, Mr. Hope, the floor is yours. Add to your report.
Yeah, I mean, most of the matters that we've been working on have actually been flowed through the council meetings that we've had, particularly those items that I've listed under the introduction. I know Mr. Lanyon is very keen to engage with the committee. It's a matter noted under health and safety. There were just some questions in the draft agenda meeting. And asked Matthew to come along and answer any questions about what was happening in the Aquatic Centre, particularly the uptick in number of health and safety incidents. So if we could perhaps give Matthew a chance just to speak about that briefly before we go to the rest of the report.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. Mitigations have been put in place, so
It's definitely an ongoing process, that's for sure. Thank you for the opportunity to come along and have a bit of a chat. Firstly, year on year with our incidents at the Aquatic Centre, July last year we had 24 incidents at the Aquatic Centre. This year we've had 30. So it's a slight increase. However, when you consider the built up expectation of being shut for 105 days and then reopening again, there definitely was a lot of public expectation and a lot of excitement about getting the pool reopened again. So I think we experienced that firsthand by seeing the smiles on people's faces as they came back in, but also maybe a bit of over exuberance as well when they did get back in. Generally, our incidents can be generally grouped together into sort of 3 areas. We've got some staff incidents, we've got what I class as horseplay, which is people on people type accidents. And then we have sort of our slip, trip and fall accidents, which generally are a consequence of the environment. Definitely our staff incidents that we had during July were linked, I believe, directly to just being out of practice with what normally goes on. You know, some activities, some of our crew might do 70, 80 times a day. Now, if you haven't been doing that for 105 days, starting them up again, yeah, you definitely tend to be a bit rusty. So we definitely found that with simple things like vacuuming a floor. Haven't done that for a while and you start doing it again, and some people have recorded incidents with that. Our horseplay type incidents, which is customers who might be playing around, there might be a ball to a face or a kickboard or something like that. That is usually a behavioural type thing which we try and manage through with our crew. The slip, trips and falls, definitely, you know, that's an environmental thing and that's linked to our wet area. During lockdown, we obviously resurfaced all of our wet floors, and we are still managing to treat and look after those floors at this point. We definitely found that that our cleaning regime that we had in place before we locked down wasn't quite up to spec for the increase of people coming through the place. But as we've been moving through, we're now into the 4th week, we're finding that our incidents are dropping quite considerably from early on in the at the start of when we reopened again. Probably the best way to explain the floor issue is that, actually I brought a sample along just for you guys if there's some interest. So our old floor surface was basically worn out. So it was a case of just resurfacing what we had. And it's basically a concrete surface. Pass it this way. Well, it's a 5-layer surface basically. It's a concrete surface which you then put grit on, and then you use a couple of epoxy finishes to finish off and seal it and make it waterproof. What we're finding with this particular surface, which isn't that much different from what we had before, is that if you get a lot of foot traffic on it and a lot of contaminants on it and you don't get it off, it causes a slight slickness to the surface. We discovered that very early on in the 1st week. Part of it was a little bit of leftover from our close down and our redevelopment that we did when we were shut. But we've quickly got onto that and discovered that by changing our cleaning regime, just pass it this way. Just a minute, whoops. Thank you. And as you could feel those little rough surfaces, basically what happens is we get a bit of contaminants around it, which then creates a bit of a slick surface. It's a little bit like in summer, you know, when you get a long period of clear weather and the roads have a lot of traffic on them, you get rubber and oil and those sorts of build-ups on the road, and then you get a shower of rain, you tend to get a bit of a slick surface. And that's pretty much what's happened with this flooring. As you can see from the little, very simple graph that I'm just passing around now, that shows 3 weeks of operating, and it shows our numbers of people through the place, and then a decreasing number of incidents as we're getting on top of managing this. It's definitely a work in progress. You know, we were busier than we expected to be when we first opened, but I think it's a bit of pent up expectation around being shut for 105 days as well. We're very confident with our surface. It's the issue's been more around managing how to deal with it. I think, as you can see from the graph there, we have incidents early on, and as the week's gone on and we're getting it under control, the incidents have fallen off quite sharply as well.
Matthew, to ask a question?
Yeah, well, just basically to make that comment, thank you very much for coming along, Matthew. When we saw the uplift in numbers, it was not going in the wrong direction, and there was concern, and certainly seen comments about the floor had been slippery for people. So to hear your explanation, to see the evidence that you've fixed the problem and identified it and made it better is good. And just really to compliment you and your team on how the pool is looking. The whole facility has really improved, and I think people are enjoying it that much more. It's like going back 20 years to when it first opened, and having a relatively new facility again. So yeah, well done. And just a quick question, really, which is financials and health and safety. But as far as your numbers go, can you tell us how they're comparing?
Early on, we were very lucky for, well, I'll call it lucky. COVID gave us an opportunity where we were looking at a number of different program changes and reviews to what were happening. When COVID started to lift and other facilities opened up around the country, most facilities were experiencing between a 30 and 40% drop off in program numbers. So that's things like swim school, squads, aqua exercise. And it gave us a really good opportunity to look at other facilities and see what they were doing and what they were implementing. So we basically managed to copy a lot of those. At this point, we're experiencing about a 15% decrease in our program numbers, which is significantly better than many other parts of the country. So I think we've learned from other people's experiences and managed to hit the ground running with that. Casual numbers are doing well. Term 3 is always a quiet term for us as well. So, but at this stage, things are looking positive. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you, Matthew, for your report. Very informative. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And yeah, I just hope the call goes well for the rest of the year. Sorry, Councillor Chris with a question, sorry.
The total sums, is that the total patronage?
It's our swims, including casual visits, things like concession cards, and some of our program use per week.
Everybody that came through the door?
No, not spectators.
Swim, do they have accidents?
Not in these 3 weeks shown here. No, we've have resurfaced every single floor surface in the whole building with a mixture of that and new carpet right throughout as well. So if a spectator did have an accident, yes, it would be recorded.
So to me, even though we've got quite high, in that environment, I think you do really well. I mean, it's
as a percentage, first week was 0.9% of incidents to visits, and that's not just accidents. If we have a close call, we record it as well. So it's,
you say some of the incidents are staff. So when you take the percentage down to patrons, it's very, very minuscule, isn't it?
yeah, it is low. Yes, it is. Yeah. So 0.9% first week. Week 2 was 0.4%, and then week 3 0.2%. Yep. Or pedestrian crossing.
There you go.
Yeah.
50% of the workers on your farm.
Right, thank you.
Awesome.
Matthew.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. So we go back to the update. We'll start on page 32. We're quickly running out of time, but so the introduction, finance, page 33, we talked about rates, the rate arrears.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Hopkins.
Well, just so again, apologies, Mr. Chairman, but the arrears figure for amounts outstanding, that big figure, that 500,000, is that the total for the previous financial year with 341 being installment?
So the
numbers, please.
So the total, we segregated the total arrears outstanding, so that's the 871.
So
871,000 would cover
Yes,
the two
yes.
pieces. One is the arrears, so that's everything outstanding in from the 1920 year and all prior years.
yes,
And
okay.
Installment 4 only was just amounts that it's only the installment 4 amount outstanding.
Yeah, got, so in other words, it's not, the 500,000 is,
Yeah.
And the installment for amazing by our policy for
Very definitely influenced by the no penalty policy, both for the 2 instalments and for the arrears. Just an update, basically, there's been 100,000 paid off both of those, each of those amounts. So that's just in the last 3 weeks. As I said, I think we really won't know the impact of COVID until the 26th or 25th of August. But already that's gone down from that 341,000 to just over 80.
Oh, really?
There's been good progress in that area.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, focus. I mean, yeah, as is advised in the report, no penalties are being charged until the one due date, which is the 25th of August.
Yeah.
So if those amounts aren't paid by that date, then penalties will be charged. The policy, you mentioned just quickly a policy register and a bylaw, strategies and policies 2020 work program. So I'm sure that will come to
Yes,
this committee or to council?
this committee,
This committee.
just to update.
Okay, thank you. Health and safety, we had the update from the Aquatic supervisor, so they had that. Thank you, Matthew.
I'll move the recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so, yep, so the resolution to receive the report, moved Councillor Hopkins, seconded Councillor, yep. Yeah, holding. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, clear that carried. Right, now.
Mr. Chair, I'll move we go into public excluded.
Thank you,
Second.
Kuchar.
Second.
Councillor McGrovey. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, clear that carried. I'll now move into public excluded.